Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we're honored to have retired Major General of the United States Air Force and author of Flight Path, Scott Gration, with us. Appointed by President Barack Obama, Scott served as the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan from 2009 to 2011, where he played a crucial role in diplomatic efforts during a critical period in the region's history. In his book Flight Path, Scott shares his experiences and insights gained from a lifetime of service, both in the military and beyond. Born to missionary parents in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Scott's early experiences in Africa shaped his worldview and commitment to service. Scott's approach to leadership is grounded in integrity and a deep commitment to the care and well-being of those under his command. He understands that true leadership is about empowering others and helping them reach their full potential. Today, Scott will share his wisdom on how servant leadership can transform organizations and inspire others to greatness.
Scott, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you.
Well, it's an honor for me to meet with you. I have great memories of the last time we chatted, and I look forward to this.
Yeah, it's not every day that I get to talk to a real hero, so this is going to be fun. For those that might not know you or know your story, can you give a little bit of career background?
Well, my career is not the standard career. I went over to Africa when I was 18 months old. My folks were missionary teachers in Africa, and we started out in Congo, and then there were trouble in Congo. There was rebellions and everything else, and we ended up evacuating. And in fact, we lost everything we owned on the third evacuation. And that was actually, let me just take a parenthesis here, that was actually a pretty good thing for me because at the tender age of 13, I got rid of my trumpet, which I hated to play, and so I didn't have to practice it anymore. But I learned a very important thing. While people could take everything we owned, and we lost everything except the clothes on our backs and the car we were riding in, nobody could take what's in your heart, and nobody can take what's in your cranium. And while I didn't sort of apply that lesson, it really came back to me that your relationships with God, your family, your friends, and whatever you can store in your head, nobody can grab. They can take your backpack, they can take your trumpet, they can take your shoes, whatever they want, but they can't take that stuff. Now, I must admit that even though I believe that nobody can take what was in your head, I had a hard time putting academics up there. So I went back to the States, and I didn't do very well in high school. I was put in auto mechanics, which I did very well in, mechanical drawing and wood shop and that kind of thing. But then I had to take this test called the placement test. And I found out I was best suited to be a shepherd. And I don't even like sheep. And so at that point I said, man, I better learn something. And so I took algebra and trigonometry and introduction to calculus and summer schools and night schools. And I was accepted into Rutgers University, but they said, you have to become an engineer because you don't know how to read. So I became a mechanical and aerospace engineer. And then I had this thing called a draft number. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, our birth date was equated with a number. And then based on where that correlation turned out, you ended up going to Vietnam if you had a number like 6. And so I went down to take a physical with about 300 other naked people at Fort Dix. I said, man, there's got to be a better way. And I went over to McGuire Air Force Base and signed up to be a pilot in the Air Force. And fortunately, I was able to enter into ROTC and learned how to fly. And then I joined the Air Force after college, went to pilot training, became a T-38 instructor pilot. And then I was taken, before that assignment was done, actually to the F-5, which is a single seat, 2-engine fighter. And I flew that both in Arizona and then with the Kenya Air Force. And then I was a White House fellow. And then I was going to go to NASA to fly in the space shuttle, but they couldn't give me a date to fly for about 3 years. And I said, oh man, I can't do this. And so the Air Force was coming out with this airplane called the F-16, and I was given one of the slots, and right off the bat, when it was just almost just out of experimental status. And it was almost like being a test pilot. We didn't do very well in the early days, and and some of my friends were killed in new things. It was the first airplane to have a fly-by-wire, and that was a problem initially. It was also one of the first airplanes to pull 9Gs, and so it could actually black you out, and you could go from conscious to unconscious without going through the standard other clues like tunnel vision, that kind of thing. In fact, as I lost a very good friend who was looking over his shoulder, pulling hard, blacked out, and didn't wake up. And so it was an interesting career in flying. And then I went and did some staff jobs in Turkey and in the Pentagon. And the good Lord blessed, and I couldn't get out of the Air Force because they kept giving me 3-year commitments and then moving me every 2 years. But fortunately, I was a major general before they allowed me to get out. And I had a wonderful career. I wouldn't trade another day, but I didn't follow the career path. I just did what came, and it turned out all right.
Wow. That is fascinating. I even learned some stuff I didn't know in there, which is crazy. When you think about even just the process of getting drafted and looking back at how you got started in what ended up being the path for a lot of where your life went, would you have taken this route if the draft wasn't there?
No. In fact, I was looking to be a pilot with Missionary Aviation Fellowship or one of the missionary aviation, and I was seriously considering going and getting my A&P and becoming a missionary pilot. That's where my heart was, to go back to Africa to help out, and I had a natural affinity to flying, and I thought that the two would mix very well. My background in Africa, growing up there, speaking the language and that kind of thing, and then flying also. So it sort of came as a surprise, really, when I got drafted, and I said, good Lord, what are we doing here? And then we went to this thing called Urbana, which is a conference where a lot of people, young people, get together in Champaign, Urbana, over the Christmas vacation. And somebody there, one of the booths said, you can be a missionary in the military. You don't have to serve God in a small airplane in Irian Java or Kenya or someplace. You can be flying fast jets and serve God as a missionary. And he said, in fact, not everybody can get into the military. Not everybody can be a fighter pilot. Not everybody can witness to people in a squadron where you have that kind of relationship that's pretty closed. And so we took that as a challenge and decided that, okay, it's maybe time for us to expand the horizon and think of missionary aviation being in the United States Air Force. And it really changed our attitude, my wife's and mine. We got married and committed to do that.
Wow. Did you ever find, as you kind of went down the career path and thinking about integrating your faith, thinking about integrating your work, thinking about just faith in the military in general, and your role, Major General, I mean, did that get sticky, sharing your faith or sharing your viewpoints on different things?
Not really.
Okay.
I always made a commitment that I'm not going to sacrifice my faith in God and my values and my integrity. And I never did have to sacrifice. And it was interesting that, when you strive to be excellent, when you try to be the best you can be as a fighter pilot and a friend and a comrade in a fighter squadron, people come to you when they need you. We had a couple of fatalities, and the doors were there for us to help and share and explain the whole concept of faith and eternal life and what it really means. And then when we live so close to dying, faith, you either have faith or you don't have faith. You either believe in yourself or you believe in God. The reality of this is when you're down at 500 feet, flying 500 miles an hour fast, you're not very far away from knocking at St. Peter's Gate. And you just get used to living in that kind of world. And for me, I knew that every day could be my last. but I knew that every day I had to prepare for the future, but I had to live as if it was the last. So telling my wife I loved her, living with short accounts, and trying not to do anything you were embarrassed about or didn't want to have closed up when somebody come rifling through your drawers after your last sortie. It sort of makes you live in the present, and it makes you sort of live with eternity's values in view, because they're right around the corner when you're a fighter pilot. But the interesting thing is, I didn't anticipate being a general, flying the F-16 and being at the top of the game and being a White House fellow under President Reagan and working with all the presidents, really. And there was a book came out when I was a captain. It was called A Turtle on a Fence Post. And that little image was one that sort of kept me going. Turtles don't climb on top of fence posts. Somebody puts that turtle on top. The view is great. It's wonderful, but you didn't get there by yourself. And I think that image is one that kept me grounded and kept me realizing that I was there by somebody, for somebody, and I needed to make a difference in my actions.
I mean, there's a lot of good leadership lessons in everything you just said, but even taking just the concept of you leading a lot of people, you led a lot of people throughout your career. How did you integrate servant leadership? How did you even think about leadership in your different roles in being a good leader?
Well, servant leadership for me was, you still have to be a good leader, and even if you're a servant leadership, but it was just a different perspective. It was one of giving. It wasn't about me. It was about building teams. It was about being a cheerleader. It was about enabling. It was about recognizing. And that's really what it is. There was a book that was written by, I think his name is Stephen Pressfield, called Gates of Fire. And it takes place back in Sparta times. I think they were trying to defend Thermopylae or somewhere. And I always keep this on my desk. And if you don't mind, I'll just read a couple of lines there. It says, "A king does not abide within his tent while men bleed and die on the field. A king does not dine when his men go hungry, nor sleep when they stand watch on the wall. A king does not command his men to loyalty through fear, nor does he purchase it with gold. He earns their love by the sweat of his own back and the pains he endures for their sake. When challenged by a difficult task, the king lifts first and sits down last. The king does not require service of those he leads. He provides it to them. He serves them, not they him. The king does not expend his substance to enslave men, but by his conduct and example makes them free." And I would go over this. I had two things on my desk, this and the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. That was written for me about 800 years ago, and we'll talk about this later, but it talks about, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." And when you talk about peace and understanding that's our ultimate quest, and then style points, doing it like a king should do it, by servant leadership, by commitment to service before self, then the rest of leadership is easy. Now, I'm saying that you've got to, for me, servant leadership meant building teams. If it meant building my team and making sure people were trained, organized, and equipped, and that they were well-resourced and motivated and inspired. And I like to work with other teams, making sure that I didn't worry about turf wars or who got the credit. But then I do two things. The first thing is doing the right things, and that's really what leadership is. And the second thing is doing things right, and that's more management. But the whole thing about doing the right things, a lot of times we like rain dances. But if you talk to a farmer, and my grandparents were farmers, it's not about the rain dance. It's about the rain. It's about bringing water to your plants. It's about getting results. That's what leaders do. And you got to have that vision. You got to have a strategy. You have to have strategic objectives. And then you really have to motivate and inspire and innovate. And you got to help those around you be efficient and effective in what they do, making sure that they have everything they need. It's not about you. It's not about your results. It's not about your evaluation. It's about people that work for you. Then the last thing about doing things right. Boy, style points matter. I love the Air Force core values because they say integrity first, excellence, and service before self. And really, if you do those three things, boy, you really can't lose. If you can create an environment where integrity is valued, where innovation and excellence are rewarded, and then you foster new ideas to get effectiveness and efficiency, it's great. If you can trust people because they have integrity, boy, that takes a lot of the discipline things away. When people wake up in the morning trying to do the right thing, man, you can't go wrong. I mean, you have to sometimes give more training, but you don't have to give direction and discipline. And so I encourage people to strive toward integrity first, because really, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. And integrity is one of those things where you have to live it in order to get it. And you can't nobody can take it. You have to give it away. And so the bottom line is, if you can wake up every day having integrity, whatever happens to you, nobody can take your integrity. And if you have integrity, nothing else matters. So that's really the bottom line of servant leadership is helping build a team, being a cheerleader, inculcating integrity and excellence and service in all you do. And the rest is easy.
I mean, the rest is easy, right? So you've had a front row seat from your standpoint on literally the world's greatest leaders, regardless of how people view U.S. presidents. They are some of the world's greatest leaders of all time. And then you also are talking about integrity. And I think a lot of people look at presidents and often wonder where their integrity lies and if there's issues. And you literally had a front row seat. What was it like looking at leadership, working with presidents up close?
Yeah, I can. I don't really want to comment too much about people's integrity because some of this is probably not real positive. But the bottom line is there was a couple people who I really enjoyed working with because they weren't there to be somebody, but they were there to do something. And also, I tended to gravitate toward people that took care of people because that's really where I come from. I think it's very important to make your subordinates successful. So not only do I want a boss that will make me successful and try to mentor me and help me and give me opportunities for me to grow, but I want to do that for people that work for me. And I think a little bit really comes down to encouragement. I'm one who learned from folks early in my career to take the time to write thank you letters. I worked for Dr. Hans Mark when I was a White House Fellow at NASA. And he would come in the morning, and I used to be the guy that traveled with him. And then I had to write reams and reams of thank you letters to everybody we met. And they were all, I remember the first time I wrote one that was a little bit negative. And he said, no, that's not what this is about. find something to which you could praise him. And he would send letters out to everybody who he met on the trip to say thank you. And I took that on when I was a senior leader. My last base, I had about 25,000 people in the catchment area. And I wanted to make sure that to the maximum extent, everybody heard from me at least twice on a personal basis. So I started by giving out birthday cards. And so every night I'd go home with a stack of birthday cards where I would sign their name and my name, wishing them all the best in the next year or the next trip around the sun or whatever it said. And I would sign all of those with my name and their name, not all handwritten. And then I had a young airman that helped me in the morning look through the base paper, look through birth announcements, to find out what kids were doing that I could be thankful for and praise and recognize, and who had a baby and who just did this and that. And I would send out another batch of letters. And then I would try to write to spouses and parents and kids and talk about their kids. And I remember going someplace and a man came up to me and said, "General Gration, do you know that we still have a letter that you sent us from the Desert Storm where you wrote about our son and his contributions to America in the desert? It's still on our refrigerator." I mean, that little letter that I pumped out when I was in combat was a huge, big deal for this family. And taking time to write and appreciate is huge. And my belief is that's what really helps motivate the team. And don't just look, we just had this thing with Oppenheimer and Barbie this last week, and we saw the Oscars and all those kinds of things, and we're all proud of them. But what it really reminded me is that we love to look at the Ken and Barbies in the world. And it's the people that look good and sound good, who are articulate, who are thin and wear the right kind of shoes and the right kind of clothes and have the right kind of car, that we tend to recognize. But there's a whole lot of people like me, ugly people that just are working as hard as they can, trying to do the best job they can with integrity and service and excellence. And because they're not in the limelight, because they're not pretty or handsome, they sometimes get overlooked. And so I work very hard to make sure that all the people that work for me get recognized. And I would have this thing management by walking around where I took time every day to spend time walking into people's office and trying to catch them doing a good job so that I could say thank you or that I could recognize formally. I also came up with 3 awards that has sort of been the hallmark of my leadership. The first one is called the Kopion Award. It's a Greek word. It's sort of, if I could put my definition to it, it means to work until you're utterly exhausted. It's to have that plate that keeps growing. And when you put more things on that person's plate, their plate keeps expanding. I've had people who work for me and we just sometimes tend to take advantage of them. We give them more to do because they do it so well. And sometimes you say, I need this done well and I don't have time to do it. Give it to her. And you got to take time to recognize those people. You got to take time to give them some time off because they get taken for granted because they do such good work. The other award was called the Oportu Award. Back in the old days, ships used to sit outside the harbor waiting for the tide and waiting for the wind so that they could get blown into the harbor. Now, that meant that captain had to be awake, and he had people watching for the wind and the tide so that he could get his boat into the harbor. We have people that take advantage, sometimes early in the morning, late at night, but take advantage of situations. And the Oportu is the word opportunity. That's where it comes from. Oportu, opportunity. We have people that are there and jump on a situation, capitalize on the opportunity, and make stuff happen. That initiative is worth rewarding. You need people around you that can do that. And that's why I had the Aborto Award that I could give them with. And then I had another one called the Tarango Tower Award. You know, the Tarango Towers are in Pakistan somewhere, but from what I can see, they go straight up. And only a few people can climb these mountains. And I've had people work for me that I've given them jobs that, man, that was a straight up climb, and they would make it. I mean, we have amazing people. When you challenge them with a straight up climb, boy, they got those ropes and climbing things on, and man, they're up the hill. They need to be recognized. Not everybody can do that. So I developed these 3 awards, but I also had other teamwork awards because I think teamwork is just as important. These are individual awards, but teamwork is critical. Because what really makes your team is being able to cheerlead when people can contribute to the unit in a way that makes it more effective and more efficient and achieves results.
Obviously, that is just amazing. I mean, just hearing that, I'm thinking through my own team, and I'm like, gosh, what kind of awards do we need to give? What kind of award system do we need to set up? It's just fascinating to think through that. You've lived so much life. It's not often that you bump into people who have written a book. And you wrote a book about a lot of the stuff we're talking about and way more. For our listeners, share a little bit about why you wrote a book and what's written in the book. And I know there's a powerful story of forgiveness in there too that I'd love for you to share if you're willing with our audience.
You know, I wrote the book actually for me initially. I'll just step back and explain what happened is that I had my dream job. After I left the military as a major general, I was responsible for 94 countries in Europe and Africa and Eurasia. And I had responsibility for strategy, plans, and policy. And after this, and through this, I met a senator called Obama. And it was crazy because I was a Republican and he was a Democrat. I was a general, he was a community organizer. I was white, he wasn't. I mean, we just weren't people who you would think would naturally come together. And he asked me to take him to Africa. He said, "You're more African than I am, and my father is from Kenya," because I spoke Swahili and all the rest of it. And so, but through that experience, I got to know him, and he not only asked me to become the special envoy to Sudan to help Sudan work through getting peace with Darfur and then becoming the 54th nation in Africa, South Sudan, to be independent and all that. But after that, I became the ambassador to Kenya. And for me, that was my dream job. I went over to Africa when I was 18 months old. I learned to speak Swahili before I learned English. As I said, my parents are missionaries over there. I then went back and did humanitarian service after college. And then I flew F-5s, which is that single-seat fighter with the Kenya Airforce. And so my life was intertwined with Kenya. In fact, as my wife's parents are missionaries, and they went over to Africa in 1953, and she was born in Nairobi. And so here was my wife and I were both sort of from Africa. We both knew the people, we knew the customs, we knew everything. And here I was, the U.S. ambassador to Kenya. Now, I was at the top of my game. I mean, I was living. But sometimes when you're innovative, you work out of the box and think out of the box. And when you're working with an organization that's pretty much by the book, like the State Department was, there were a few people that didn't like it. And there was some false allegations that were spread. And then the rest is history. A team came out to investigate. And I didn't even get a chance to answer all these allegations that were egregiously false and lies. And in fact, as I was asked to step down, I was actually fired after 3 days of this inspection, without an opportunity to express my views, to even give any kind of reclama. And it was hard. I had to move out of the ambassador's quarters. It was very embarrassing for me and my wife. Many of my friends thought that I had embezzled money or had an immoral affair or something. And nobody could believe that in the course of 3 days I was gone. I mean, it was like I was hit in the head with a baseball bat, or I was in an F-16 spinning out of control. I just couldn't believe this was happening to me. It was hard. And so I had to leave my career. And even though after 2 months of investigation, I was totally exonerated. But I didn't get my job back. And a lot of the information on the internet stayed out there. Nobody said they were sorry. In fact, there was no public apology, and the only exoneration letter came in a letter to me in a brown manila envelope. And there was no public announcement that says we were wrong. Gration shouldn't have been knocked out of his job. And for 2 years, I'll be honest with you, Chris, I ended up having despair, anger. I was bitter. I was depressed. It clouded my view of life. It clouded my relationships with my family and with other people. And it really hurt. It was really hurt. I just almost couldn't function. I couldn't understand how people could tell lies about me and not be sorry. And I was waiting for somebody to come and say that they were sorry, so I could say, I forgive you. And then I understood this thing called the Lord's Prayer, that I was forgiven before I was even born. And then St. Francis of Assisi wrote this thing that in pardoning we are pardoned. I never understood that before. I always understood, Lord, make ministry your peace and showing love and all that stuff. But that thing about in pardoning, we are pardoned. And that's how we work toward eternal life, and later on in the prayer. It was really meaningful to me. And through this process of forgiving, I was able to cut the anchor. Now, the anchor of my boat stayed mired in the embassy troubles and shoals, but my boat was able to drift. And I started improving, and I started becoming better and not bitter. And I started working through relationships, and I started a company, and life was becoming pretty good. And then we had a campaign where a lady was running for president, and she ended up having some trouble with emails. And somebody said, didn't you fire an ambassador over emails? Which was one of the allegations against me. That was then since, proven totally false. And she said, yeah, there was a lot of things. And I said, whoa. I mean, I was already thrown under the bus once. I said, just let me write my side of the story. And then I started writing. I said, wait a minute, this isn't about me. Let me just write things I've learned by looking in the rearview mirror. And I started writing stories, and they all came up with lessons that I learned over the decades of my life. Things about having integrity, about humility, about having gratitude, about living life with short suspenses, but planning for a long life. And so there's 12 lessons learned that came out of this, and also the lessons that I learned from forgiveness, that a lot of us carry around unforgiven relationships that make us depressed, that make us ineffective, that make us hard to live with people around us and hard to see the beauty in life because we haven't forgiven. And it was like when I was a little kid, my parents sort of ingrained this in me that I was supposed to say, I forgive you after somebody came to me and said, I'm sorry. So you do something and you say you're sorry, and then the other person says you're forgiven. Well, it never happened. There was never an asking for forgiveness or being sorry. And I learned that in life, we just have to forgive proactively. And it's hard. But when you do, it's so freeing. And that prayer is so meaningful because really, in pardoning, we are pardoned. And we need to follow the example that Jesus set for us in forgiving our trespasses as we forgive those who forgive our trespass, whatever that says. It doesn't say wait until you're sorry. It says forgive those that trespass against us. And for me, that was an amazing lesson. And hopefully I've been able to share with people through this book. So the book is a lot of fun stories about growing up in Africa and being the youngest person to have a hunting license and doing a lot of things and not learning how to read, and then getting stuck in the military and then having the Lord bless us in a wonderful career that I couldn't even imagine for 32 years. And then have a diplomatic career where we were able to sort of stop the conflict in Darfur, work on the terrorism issue, but have the referendums that allowed the people from South Sudan to elect to become their own country. But more important than that, to do this after they'd been fighting for 40 years, to be able to have a breakaway without having bloodshed. And that was 24 consecutive miracles. And I don't take credit for these, but I give honor to a lot of people that work with me, and of course the good Lord for making that all happen. So the book is that story, the story of my flight path from the son of Africa to a warrior diplomat. And I've been able to use it since for telling the story of forgiveness, because that's really what it all comes down to. And then there's another aspect of it. I learned that nobody can wreck your day. It's your attitude that wrecks your day. No matter what happens to you, if you can have an attitude of gratitude, and if you can figure out the good things that are happening in that situation, then life is good. And that's what I try to do. I try to get up and find at least one or two things that I can be thankful for and that I can express my gratitude for. I made a carving during COVID of 3 links that are tied together. And the whole concept there is that you can't get it apart. The links are tied together. And there's political, there's economics, there's medical, there's all these little links that people have tried to understand and solve. But when you step back and look at that thing, it's a beautiful piece of art, these interwoven links. And if it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't have called my grandmother every day for 3 years until she died. And not my grandmother, my mom, my kid's grandmother. And because of COVID, we decided to take the positive steps, since she couldn't have visitors, of calling her every day. I tell you, I was so blessed by COVID and the relationship that grew out of being able to call my mom every night. It was so cool. And what I've learned is all those bad things that happened to me, I work very hard to find something positive that can come out of it as an end result or as a day-to-day process that I can do to make that thing in my life that is a thorn into a blessing. And I tell you what, I'm not perfect at this, and I get mad a lot of times, and I get frustrated a lot of times. But then I do have a habit pattern of looking at things again, and it really changes your life if you can look at something in a way that's positive and find that little nugget to be thankful for. And I tell you what, now I don't have any problem finding something to be thankful for. When you're as old as I am, just waking up and breathing is a big source of being thankful, and having other things go your way. Especially, and I'm involved in trying to bring peace to Sudan. I'm involved in other things, and when you look at the refugee crisis around the world, in Sudan and Gaza and other places, when you look at the suffering that people have, the things we complain about, the things we take for granted, it's unbelievable. You know, after I had my near miss, and I haven't talked about that near miss, but I almost lost my life over San Antonio, and I went to Uganda after that situation. People were existing in gunfire. They were eating just bananas. They had a half a glass of water a day at the most to drink. And I came back and I realized how much we have and how much we have to share and how much we take for granted. There's been several things in my life where I have come face to face with the realities that Americans are so blessed and we so complain about what is wrong. I mean, when you start complaining about traffic, you could be walking, so it's just a perspective and an attitude that I've tried to develop. And I tried to develop it when I was a leader, to find things that I could be grateful for and to find ways of praising people for what they were doing to make our organization a better organization.
It seems like a lot of servant leadership has to do with thinking of others first, obviously, but then also just the thankfulness aspect for sure. I mean, even you haven't necessarily brought this up, but you've survived 2 terrorist attacks as well, directly in your life, right? At the Pentagon, you were at the Pentagon when that happened, when 9/11 happened, isn't that right?
That's very true. I was a couple hundred yards from where the airplane hit, and it was 196 people had their dashes closed out that day when that airplane hit our Pentagon. But it really brought back a lot of memories of Dhahran. I was the operations group commander in Dhahran when the terrorists exploded a huge big bomb. They say 20,000 pounds of TNT equivalent just outside of our gate. It blew the face off one of our dorms. It ripped through my building, blew the windows out. There was glass through the room, and unfortunately that night 19 of the people that worked for me died. And it tells you a couple things, that life can be short, and just like in situations where I came very close to losing my life in airplane accidents, 30 minutes before the accident my life was great. And then I was within seconds of being a fireball. I was fortunate and I didn't become a fireball. But that night, 19 people were taken from us through that terrorist attack. And life is short. And we have to make every minute count. And we have to recognize that we don't control the end of our dash. We control maybe the beginning, at least it started for us in one way, but then that dash, that middle piece that is on our tombstone, we make that legacy count, we make that legacy last, and we make that legacy meaningful. And I'm trying to speak to young folks and other people to try to motivate them to put things in motion, to have a meaningful dash, so that when you pass on, you've made a difference, a positive difference. That's all we're called to do our best to leave a legacy and to make a positive difference. Some people have an opportunity to make a bigger difference, but it's all a difference. And don't waste it. It's your dash, it's your legacy, make it count. And that's what I try to do every day, and that's what I'm trying to do in passing on these words to others of my long duration here on earth, where I've learned a lot of lessons. But it's about building a legacy, making a difference, and making it last.
I could seriously ask you questions for hours, but I know you don't have hours. One thing that we do with all of our podcast guests is ask them 10 rapid fire questions. And I think ending with that, based on what you just shared, I know that will be a blessing to people. These 10 rapid fire questions are not near as serious as much as the stuff that you've been sharing so far with your life story. So do you mind if I ask you 10 quick questions, and we'll ask or respond any way you want? There's no right answer. So
I'm going to respond in Swahili.
Oh boy, I won't know what you're saying.
No, I'll do it in English.
Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
Jesus Christ.
Okay. Favorite author or book outside of yourself? Knowing your own book is great. And I'm going to make sure people have the link to that too in our description.
Boy, it has to be rapid fire. I don't know how to read very well, so I've only read 2 books, Swiss Robinson Family and Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, so probably one of those.
Okay, what about favorite movie?
Out of Africa.
I haven't seen that. I'm excited to see that.
It's a good one.
Okay, favorite food?
It's a little triangle pastry called a samosa. It's made in by Indians, and I love the meat ones, not the veggie ones, but the meat samosas, definitely my favorite.
What's your favorite thing to do in your free time?
I restore cars and I wood carve.
What kind of cars?
I've rebuilt an MGB, which I have in my driveway, and I'm now working on an old Cadillac. And anything that doesn't work, I like to work. Any block of wood that looks like nothing, I like to make into something beautiful.
Wow. There's a whole lesson in that too. Surprising fact about you.
I married my sister.
How does that work?
Yeah. My wife's father died in 1958 when she was 5 years old. And then her mother was killed in a car accident. And my parents became her guardian because her parents and my parents had gotten their masters together in 1948 in the States. And so my father gave her away to me, walked her down the aisle, and I became my own brother-in-law.
Wow.
And that was, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. I've known her since she was 2. And so it's a long time, 70 years.
Wow. Congrats on that. One other surprising fact that maybe this is more of a question. Don't you hold a record for most flight time or something related to flight time? You've been in the air a lot.
Yeah, I flew a lot. I mean, I was one flying fool. So I flew over 5,000 hours in fighters, but I have the record for the most combat missions over Iraq. I have 274 combat missions over Iraq.
Wow. Thank you for your service on that and all the other service. Just, amazing.
Actually, I take the credit and I say thank you, but really my wife is the one who sacrificed. I got to do what I absolutely love doing. I wouldn't trade a day of what I did. She helped raise the kids. I was gone for a year in the combat. I was gone here and there. And I really owe it to my wife and other spouses who give so much so that their men in uniform and women in uniform contribute to our country. And so I owe it all to my wife.
Favorite? I know you've been all around the world, but favorite place you've been?
Boy, I'm going to have to say Kenya. We're going back to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary in June. And we looked and said, where can we go? Is it Tahiti? Is it one of the other places we live? And our hearts go back to Kenya. It's where my wife's parents are buried and her placenta is buried. But it's where we have deep friends. And it is just stunningly beautiful with wildlife and wonderful people and great food and samosas.
This one might be a little harder, given that you've been so many places. Where do you want to go that you have not been?
Well, it can't be Arctica and Antarctica because I hate the cold now. I'd say Nepal.
Okay, great. And what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Get over it.
That's good. Well, Scott, anything else that you want to share with our audience before we sign off related to servant leadership, or anything out of the book that you want to share that you think our audience would benefit from before I let you go?
Well, I've been very blessed to have, as you say, worked with 6 of our presidents, and the book does entail that. I've also been blessed to have been hit over the head with a hammer, as I almost lost my life in an F5 and in combat and that kind of thing. And it's a story of God's blessing and God's grace. But I think in the end of it, it really doesn't matter how much you accumulate. It doesn't matter how much you have. It's relationships. And then when you get as old as I am, and you recognize that when it all comes down to the end, we don't care what's on the wall in our office. We don't care about cars we have in our garage. We don't care about our bank accounts. We want our children, our spouse, and our friends to be with us and to share and to sing and to recount memories. And so much time is spent doing the wrong stuff. And it's with me too. I mean, I spent a lot of time getting things, and I was blessed to have gotten a lot of great assignments, a lot of great awards. But really, when I come down to it, it's your relationships. It's that first thing we talked about. What's in your heart and what's in your head is the most important. And a lot of times we forget that, and we try to figure out what we can put in our pockets and what kind of clothes we can wear. And we're forgetting it's what's in your heart. It's those relationships with God and with the family and friends. It's what's in your head, those memories of good times you've had. That's the most important thing. So spend time cultivating the stuff that fits in your heart and your head, and then worry about what you can put in your pockets.
Love that. That's a great final message. Well, thank you so much. I'm so blessed to know you, so thankful for your time, and excited for people to get to know you better.
Well, this has been a great honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about servant leadership.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.